So I'll share with you a story. In the mid-1950s, there's this guy named Tex Sample. He's now a seminary professor in Kansas City, but when he was 18 in the 50s, he took a job with a pipe pulling crew. They followed behind this seismograph operation. You know, a seismograph, they detect earthquakes, you know, like that kind of stuff. And so he was going behind them with this summer job between college semesters to pull pipe. After they were finished digging a hole, the pipe is left in the ground, so pull it out, right? And so his pipe pulling partner, I have to delicately say that, was this 35-year-old African-American man named Jim. And Jim was poor, and both he and Tex made 75 cents an hour was their hourly wage. And so seismograph crews would drill a hole about 250 feet deep and then set off a stick of dynamite in the bottom of the hole and then measure the reverberations up to the surface to reveal rock formations and possible locations of underground oil. Nowadays, I think we call that fracking, right? That's how they sense where gas pockets are under the ground. And then, as this crew went on to the next site to drill a new hole and set off a new stick of dynamite, Jim and Tex would come behind them in their truck to pull out these drilling pipes so that they could be reused at another job. But this was not an easy task, and it was even harder to do in the middle of a Mississippi summer. Like it's hotter than an Arkansas summer. I mean, just sweltering and humid. And so they used this truck that had a little A-frame crane on the back of the truck, right? With a winch connected to close to the cab, right? And so the winch would lower and this A would lower down. They would grab a piece of pipe and then would raise the winch up and then pull a piece of pipe, one pipe piece at a time. So every 10-foot or 20-foot section, they'd have to unscrew it and lower it again, attach, and pull it back up, right? And on this particular day, to start the job, they noticed that the water jug mounted on the back of the A-frame truck was missing, had been stolen off the back of the truck. And so Tex, the 18-year-old, was the supervisor. And so he made the choice to go to work without it. He told Jim, there will be plenty of stores where we can get water and cold drinks during the day. But without saying a word, Jim, where they met at the gas station to ride together, Jim, without saying a word, he kind of walked around to the side of the gas station, rummaged around and found an old, rusty oil can. Back in the 50s, they didn't sell oil in little quart plastic jugs. It was a metal can, right? So he found an old, rusty oil can, and he went to the little spout that was near the gas pump where just free water was offered, and he rinsed it out a couple times, then filled up the oil can, and then went and sat on the passenger side of this old A-frame truck and just put that can between his feet so it wouldn't spill. There's not a cup holder made for an oil can. So he held it between his feet, and Tex kind of looked at it and saw like the oil slicks kind of pulling up in the top of the water, and occasionally a flake of rust would float up to the top of the water, and Tex kind of looks like, I can't believe he's going to drink that. What is this guy thinking? And so they head out to the first job. And so after a few hours of morning work, it was now already in the upper 90s. And they'd already visited 2 drill sites, and they were on to the next. And Tex was already beginning to feel the effects of dehydration and heat exhaustion. And he kept telling himself that the country store was surely just around the corner at the next job site. And between each job, Jim would pick up that old oil can and blow back the oily rust and take a little drink of this lukewarm water. And by the 3rd job, Tex's body was beginning to tremble and shake, and you get the headache when you've been out in the sun too long and not had water. And his vision began to blur a little bit, which is kind of a red flag. And the sun was beating down like it was breathing fire. And Tex hadn't had anything to drink since early that morning at breakfast that he refused to ask Jim for a drink. He refused to ask Jim for a drink. Why? Why are we so unwilling to ask someone else for help? I don't know, there's something in our wiring that says it's only done right if you do it yourself. You ever said that to yourself? Or we say, and you're a weak person if you ask for help. That just shows weakness. And so it comes from our fiercely individualistic, bootstrap pulling American mentality that makes it so hard for us to ask somebody for a little help when we need it. Americans are much more likely to say, I'm fine, instead of, can you help? Somebody says, hi, how are you? Are everything okay? We're going to say, I'm fine, no matter what. I have a couple of girls like that on my soccer team. They can come off with a leg missing, and they'll say, I'm fine. We just human nature, we just say, I'm fine. I think we're so influenced by that American ethic of self-sufficiency that asking for help almost never comes to mind. We're so focused on caring for ourselves that we don't even realize that we need help. And pastors, they can be some of the world's worst. We're too busy helping other people. We will never ask for help. It's not healthy. And so we miss out on the gifts that someone else can offer us. We miss out on the gifts that Christ can give to us through them. And we see this example in Mark chapter 10, verse 46 through 52. It goes like this. It says, they came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting on the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood still and said, call him here. And they called the blind man, saying, take heart, get up. He is calling you. So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, my teacher, let me see again. And Jesus said to him, go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So Bartimaeus had no problem asking others for help. And as a result, it was nothing less than miraculous. Because he was just sitting by the roadside as a crowd followed Jesus and his disciples out of Jericho on their way to Jerusalem. And as Jesus was about to pass by with no hesitation, with no sense of embarrassment or decorum, the blind man shouted, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And the crowd had grown blind to this blind beggar who sat on the roadside every day. They saw him every day as they walked to and from their lives. As he sat there every single day with his cloak, hoping that maybe, just maybe, somebody, anybody, might just toss him a coin to spare him for another day, that he might have a morsel to eat. So the townspeople, they walked past this lost cause every day. But now this blind beggar actually had the audacity to call out to the King of Kings for a little help. And so the crowd tells him quickly to hush. Basically, it translates to shut up. But he refused to listen to them, and he just yelled even louder. But I can't really blame him. He didn't really have anything to lose because he had nothing. So he had nothing to lose. He knew that he needed the Messiah's restoration. When we have comfort and independence, when we have our own needs easily met, money, home, a car, health, those comforts can blind us from seeing any need of restoration. We don't see that we need to ask for help. So being self-made can lead to self-inflicted blindness. But once we finally ask for help, we open that door to restoration. We ask for help, and it begins when we acknowledge that we have a problem that we can't solve alone. And Bartimaeus knew that he had problems, and he trusted that Jesus was the one that could bring healing and restoration. And he's eager for whatever help Jesus can give. And so we see this miracle of Jesus restoring his sight. But we often, almost always, miss the other miracle in this story of Bartimaeus. It's because that crowd that shouted at him to shut up is the same crowd that Jesus tells, call him here. And the crowd says, take heart, get up. He's calling you. That's another miracle. Jesus got the crowd to get up and help with this restoration. Not only had Bartimaeus been cured of blindness, but the crowd had also been cured of their own blindness, of their neighbor, and became a channel for healing for Jesus. And so that story, it begs the question, are we as open to the possibility that we can be healed by Jesus or by others that he might send to help us when we ask for help? Are we willing to be used as a source to help when Jesus calls us to help others to get up? In need of help at the 4th job site pulling pipes, Tech Sample was feeling more woozy and exhausted, with his headache getting worse, pounding, throbbing, and his coordination was starting to not be very good. And he had knowledge of the symptoms of heat exhaustion and heat stroke, so Tex knew that he had to have something to drink soon, that his life depended on it. But he was afraid to ask for help. Sample says, I had to have water, but I was a white boy who had never knowingly drunk from the same glass or anything else with a black person. My own racism was actively at work in my head, but I needed water more than I needed prejudicial prohibitions. Because in the 1950s, he was instructed not to share a source of drinking water. But finally, he mustered up the courage to ask for help. He said, Jim, would you mind if I had a drink from your can? No, sir, boss, help yourself. With that, Jim handed the can to Tex, and as Tex took that drink, he heard a voice. He heard a voice like Jesus saying, this is my cup of salvation given for you. And Tex said, in my stark need, Jim became a priest to me, and he felt that he had been restored to life. And in a very literal sense, he was saved from heat exhaustion. Because all Tex had to do was ask. And Jim became that vessel for Jesus to help Tex physically and spiritually. So why are we so stubborn to ask for help? We will all likely have those times of despair, sitting on our own cloaks of suffering like Bartimaeus. And it can feel like a very lonely place, but we're not alone. We have a God who hears our cry, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And who responds, well, what do you want me to do for you? Can you imagine Jesus asking you that same question? What would be your response? What are your deepest needs that you haven't asked Jesus or anyone else to help you with? How might that leap of faith help you to jump up from your cloak of suffering and ask, believing that you can receive restoration? How might God be asking you to help others to come out of their own cloak of suffering, to step up to their own restoration? How might God be asking you to help? Because faith is the channel for asking. And asking is the channel for healing. And we are often the channel that Christ uses to restore our own neighbor. So I thank God that we have each other. And as the crowd said, take heart. Jesus is calling you. Throw off your cloak and jump up and run to Jesus. Don't walk, run to Jesus to be restored. But we have to be willing to ask for it and be willing to offer help, even if somebody doesn't have the courage to ask yet. Be willing to offer help, to invite the carpenter in. So let's start now in prayer. Would you bow with me? And say this to yourself. Jesus, our healer, I know I need help. I know I need you. Give me the courage to ask for help when I need it. To welcome your help from others. And to offer your help when others need it. May I be restored through you. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Amen.